Before I tell you about the $4.2 million, I need to explain why my own mother stood in front of our entire church congregation and asked everyone to pray for my recovery. I was 29 years old. I had never taken so much as an unprescribed Advil in my life. But if you talk to anyone in Macon, Georgia who knew the Whitfield family, they would have told you a story about a daughter who had a breakdown, disappeared in the middle of the night, and checked herself into a long-term facility somewhere out west. Before I take you back to the Sunday morning I found out what my mother had been saying, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me your age and where you're listening from, and go ahead and hit subscribe. Welcome to Plum Vengeance. You're going to want to stay for this one. 14 months before I sat across from a partner at a venture capital firm in Austin and watched him slide a signed term sheet across the table, I was standing in the parking lot of a Dollar General in Savannah, Georgia, reading a text message from my cousin. The message said, "Hey, I just want to say I'm proud of you for getting help. Your mama told us what you've been going through. We're all praying." I read it 3 times. Then I sat down on the curb between 2 shopping carts and stared at the asphalt. My mother, Vivienne, no wait. I need to be careful here. I'll just call her what I always called her. My mother. And my brother, I'll call him what he is. My brother. My mother had been building a life around appearances since before I was born. She grew up working class in Bibb County and married up, or what she considered up, a man who managed a mid-sized logistics depot outside the city. She joined the church ladies' committee within 6 months of moving into their neighborhood. She had the kind of front porch that looked like a magazine spread. Seasonal flags, coordinated planters, a doormat that said, "Bless this home," in a font she had custom ordered. My brother was 3 years older than me, 32 to my 29. He had our mother's talent for charm and our father's confidence, which together made him the kind of man who could convince a room full of people he had everything figured out while quietly drowning. He had opened a custom woodworking shop 2 years earlier, handcrafted furniture, high-end finishes, a whole brand around Southern craftsmanship. He had a beautiful Instagram page. He had almost no actual business infrastructure. When my grandfather passed, my father's father, a quiet man who smelled like cedar and kept his finances as organized as his workshop, he left his savings to me directly. $84,000. He had told me once when I was 19 and just starting college that he knew I was the one who would do something real with it. He patted my hand and said, "Don't let anyone talk you out of your own future." The money hit my account on a Wednesday. By Friday evening, my mother had called me twice, and my brother had shown up at my apartment with sweet tea and a proposal. He needed a capital injection. That was the phrase he used. Capital injection. Like this was a business meeting and not my brother sitting on my secondhand couch asking me to hand over my dead grandfather's life savings to cover his operational losses. I asked him what had happened to the SBA loan he took out 14 months ago. He said that it covered equipment. I asked about the line of credit from the local credit union. He said that was for the storefront build-out. I asked him what exactly the $84,000 would go toward. He looked at my mother, who was standing in my kitchen doorway with her arms crossed and an expression that said, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She said it was family. She said it was what you do. I said no. I said it quietly. I said it clearly. I said it clearly. The drive home that night, I replayed my mother's face when I handed back the folded paper with the account numbers on it. She wasn't hurt. She was calculating. I had seen that look before, always right before she redirected a situation to her advantage. I packed 2 suitcases that weekend. I gave notice at my apartment. I had been working remotely for a healthcare analytics firm for 3 years. I could work from anywhere. I had been building something else on the side, slowly for 18 months. A software platform designed to help small medical practices manage billing compliance without hiring full-time billing departments. The independent practice market was enormous and almost entirely underserved by existing software. I had a working prototype. I had 2 small pilot clinics in Georgia already testing it. I did not tell my mother where I was going. She needed a story. I understood that about her before I even left the state. She couldn't tell the women at church, or her neighbors, or her book club that her daughter simply walked away because she refused to subsidize her son's failing business. That narrative had no sympathetic lead for her to play, so she built a different one. I found out through my cousin's text. I confirmed it through a phone call with my aunt 3 days later. My mother had been telling people I had experienced a mental health crisis, that the pressure of my job had become too much, that I had checked into a residential program. She asked people to respect the family's privacy during a difficult time and to keep us in their prayers. I was sitting in a furnished studio in Raleigh, North Carolina, debugging code at 11 at night when I got the call. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that. I didn't feel devastated in the way I think I was supposed to. What I felt was something colder, a kind of clarifying anger that narrowed my focus the way cold air sharpens your vision. I had two options. I could call her, confront her, spend weeks or months in a cycle of denial and manipulation that would cost me energy I didn't have. Or I could disappear so completely into my work that by the time she ran out of story to tell, I would have something undeniable. I chose the second one. What I didn't know yet was that my mother wasn't just managing a narrative, she was monetizing it. My brother's woodworking shop was in free fall. The Instagram aesthetic couldn't paper over the fact that he had no inventory management system, no reliable fulfillment process, and a pricing structure that undercut his own margins. He was losing money on every order over a certain size because he had miscalculated material costs when he built his quote template and never corrected it. My mother had started quietly collecting, not donations outright. She was smarter than that. It was more subtle. She would mention to my aunt that the out-of-pocket costs for my care were mounting. She would get emotional with the church ladies when they asked how I was doing. She let people draw their own conclusions about what support might look like. I found all of this out through my sister-in-law. Her name is Priya. She married my brother 4 years ago. She is an immigration attorney, methodical and precise, and she had figured out within the first year of their marriage that my brother's charm was a surface feature and not a structural one. She had stayed, I think, because she believed she could be a stabilizing force. By the time any of this happened, she had mostly accepted that she was married to someone who required constant management and who would never fully acknowledge it. Priya and I had always understood each other without needing to discuss it. We communicated across crowded holiday tables through small gestures, a raised eyebrow when my mother started rewriting a story mid-telling, a quiet exhale when my brother made a financial decision that would cost him later. When I left, I gave Priya an encrypted messaging app and a reason. She became my eyes. Her first message, 3 weeks after I moved to Raleigh, was brief. Your mother told the Bible study group that your insurance denied coverage and the facility is asking for additional payment. 2 women wrote checks. I read the message in a gas station parking lot. I sat with it for a moment. Then I opened a notes app and wrote down what she had told me. Date, details, amounts when she knew them. This was not personal anymore. This was documentation. I am going to tell you something about the year I spent building my company in that Raleigh studio, because I think it matters. It was not glamorous. I was up before 6 most mornings and working past midnight most nights. I lived on coffee and whatever I could make in a rice cooker. I had no one to celebrate the small wins with. When a feature finally worked the way it was supposed to, I would sit with it for a minute and then move to the next problem. I was running my day job during business hours and building my platform every other hour. I lost 12 pounds. My eyeglass prescription changed. I started keeping a legal pad next to my laptop just to track the things I needed to fix before the next morning. It was also, genuinely, the most alive I had ever felt. The platform was called ClearBill. It automated the billing compliance process for independent medical practices, flagging coding errors before claims were submitted, integrating with existing electronic health record systems, and generating audit-ready documentation. The problem it solved was real. Medical billing errors cost independent practices hundreds of thousands of dollars annually in denied claims and compliance penalties. And the existing solutions either required a full IT department to implement or were built for hospital systems and were completely inaccessible for a 2-physician family practice. I had been in healthcare analytics long enough to know where the gap was. I had spent 18 months building a bridge across it. The 2 pilot clinics gave me data. The data gave me credibility. I started approaching small practice management conferences. I gave 2 presentations. One clinic group in the Carolinas agreed to a paid pilot, then another. While I was building, my mother was escalating. Priya's messages came every week or two, always measured, always specific. My mother had begun producing what she described as documentation of my care, printed statements from a facility that Priya confirmed after a careful search did not exist at the address listed. She was passing these papers to wealthier members of the congregation, people who could write larger checks. The story had grown from a vague mental health crisis to a specific narrative about a dual diagnosis program in Arizona. She had a program name. She had a cost breakdown. She was committing fraud. Not in a gray area, in a very clear, documented federal mail fraud kind of way. I was 3 months away from being ready to approach investors when Priya sent me a photograph. She had found a stack of the printed statements in my brother's car. He had apparently been the one distributing them, playing the role of the worried sibling, and she had photographed every page before putting them back. The documents were impressive in their specificity. They listed daily therapy rates, medication management fees, a room and board figure. The facility's name appeared on a letterhead that looked official, but used a font I recognized from free template libraries online. I enlarged the image on my laptop screen. I cross-referenced the address. The zip code placed the supposed facility in a strip mall outside Scottsdale that housed a nail salon and a tax preparation service. I felt something shift in my chest. Not surprise. Something closer to the feeling you get when a variable you've been accounting for in your calculations finally confirms itself. I saved every image to an encrypted folder. I forwarded them to Priya with a single instruction. Keep going. Keep collecting. Don't let them know you're watching. She sent me a voice note back. Her voice was flat and composed. She said she had already started a spreadsheet. I called her the next morning. I told her what I knew. I told her I wasn't ready to move yet, that I needed my company to be further along before I surfaced, because if this became public too soon, before I had anything standing behind me, all people would see was a woman in the middle of a family dispute. I needed them to see something else first. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me what you need from me and I'll do it." I had been preparing to approach a venture capital firm in Austin that specialized in health tech infrastructure. They had funded 2 other compliance platforms in adjacent spaces. My application was strong but not extraordinary. Founders get funded on the story as much as the product, and my story, a remote solo developer with 2 paying pilots and a working prototype, was good but not yet undeniable. A week before my scheduled intro call with the firm, I received an email from an associate at the firm asking if I could speak with their due diligence team before our meeting. They were conducting founder background checks as a standard part of their process. I knew what that meant. If they searched my name, the first things that would surface in Macon, Georgia, were whatever my mother had been saying. Church networks talk. Community Facebook groups post prayer requests. The paper trail of sympathy and fabricated statements had been circulating for months. A due diligence team doing a cursory search would find concerned community posts praying for my recovery, and they would wonder why a woman supposedly in residential psychiatric treatment was also the sole founder of a health tech startup seeking institutional investment. I spent one evening very still, thinking about my options. Then I opened my laptop and wrote an email to the due diligence lead. I told them I was aware that a background check would return some unusual local results related to my family in Georgia, and that I wanted to address them directly before our meeting. I told them I could document the full context with verified evidence if they could give me 48 hours. They agreed. I put together a file. I used Priya's photographs of the fraudulent statements. I included the time-stamped SEC business registry, confirming Clearbill's founding date and my name as registered agent, which predated the first known instance of my mother telling anyone I was in treatment. I included a 3-year work history showing continuous remote employment. I included a notarized letter from the attorney I had quietly retained in Georgia, a litigator named Okafor who specialized in civil fraud, outlining the documented pattern of misrepresentation. I packaged it as a risk assessment memo, not a personal grievance. A precise, unemotional breakdown of an external liability and the steps I had already taken to document and contain it. I sent it to the due diligence lead at 8 in the morning. At 4 in the afternoon, he called me. He said he had read the memo twice. He said he had never received a pre-call document quite like it. He asked me 3 clarifying questions. Then he said he would recommend the full meeting proceed as scheduled and that he did not anticipate the background check presenting a concern. The meeting happened. I presented clear bill for 45 minutes. The firm's lead partner asked hard questions. I answered them. At the end, she said she would need 2 weeks with her team, which I understood to mean we were moving to the next stage. 13 days later, a term sheet arrived in my inbox for $4.2 million in Series A funding. I was sitting at my kitchen table when it came through. I read it twice. I closed my laptop. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot of my apartment complex for about 3 minutes without thinking about anything at all. Then I opened my laptop and called Okafor. I told him it was time. He had been waiting. He had the civil complaints drafted for 6 weeks. Defamation, fraud, notorious interference with prospective economic advantage. That last count specifically addressed the attempted sabotage of my investor relationship. He had Priya's spreadsheet, her photographs, the time-stamped communications, and sworn statements from 2 congregation members who had given money and were now, upon learning the truth from Priya's quiet conversations, willing to put that in writing. We filed on a Tuesday. I did not call my mother to warn her. I did not send a message. I did not give her the opportunity to build another story before the first one was dismantled. What I did do was call the editor of the Macon Community News blog, the kind of local digital newsletter that everyone in a certain church-going, neighborhood association attending demographic actually reads. And I told her I had a story she might be interested in. I told her I was a Macon native who had just closed a $4 million health tech funding round and that I was prepared to do a short interview. The newsletter published the interview 3 days after the lawsuits were filed. I heard about what happened at my mother's church from Priya, who was not there but whose friend was. My mother had organized a small gathering that Sunday, a casual fellowship brunch in the social hall, the kind of thing where someone inevitably mentioned my name and people updated each other on my supposed condition. Priya's friend said it started the way those things always do. Someone asked how I was doing. My mother prepared to give her practiced answer about the long road to recovery and the high cost of specialized care. And then 3 people at the table looked down at their phones at the same time. The newsletter had sent its morning digest. The headline said, Macon native closes $4.2 million funding round for health tech startup. The photograph showed me standing outside the Austin firm's office in a blazer, looking entirely and unmistakably healthy, functional, and present. Priya's friend said my mother went very still, that she looked at the screen someone tilted toward her and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said something about photographs being misleading and technology being untrustworthy, which is not a sentence that lands well when you are trying to explain away a Forbes-linked business article to a room full of people who just realized they may have donated money to your son's business under the cover of a story you invented. The woman sitting next to my mother, a woman named Dorothy who had written a check for $3,000 3 months earlier, stood up. Quietly, without making a scene. She picked up her purse, said she needed to make a call, and walked out of the social hall. She called her bank. The 2 process servers arrived at my mother's home that Wednesday afternoon. The lawsuits were 42 pages. My mother opened the door and one of the servers handed her the documents and said her name in a flat, professional tone, which is the legal system's version of saying, "We see you." My brother received his copy at the woodworking shop. He was alone when it arrived, which I hadn't planned but which somehow felt appropriate. He called Priya immediately after, his voice apparently thin and a little unrecognizable. He asked her if she knew anything about this. Priya told me later that she had paused for a moment before responding. Then she said, "I knew everything about this." She filed for divorce the following week. I want to tell you about the moment I understood it was over. Not dramatically, not with any particular flourish. I was at my desk in Raleigh, reviewing deployment documentation for the first Clear Bill implementation with a new client group in Tennessee, when I received a notification from Okafor's case management system. My mother had retained a local attorney, but he withdrew within 3 weeks. The retainer apparently depleted what she had. The 30-day response deadline passed. She filed nothing. Okafor submitted for a default judgment. The judge ruled on all counts. The defamation finding was public record. The fraud counts were public record. The injunction prohibiting my mother and brother from discussing my name, my medical history, or my business entities with any press, investor, or family member, that was public record too. Permanent. Binding. Violation meant contempt of court. My mother's attorney, the one who had briefly represented her, sent Okafor a settlement proposal a week before the default ruling. She wanted to sign a private NDA, seal the exhibits, make it disappear behind closed doors. I instructed Okafor to decline. I had never wanted a private resolution. A sealed settlement is a reset button. It lets someone change rooms and start a new story for a new audience. A public judgment is a permanent fixture. Anyone who Googles my mother's name in relation to mine will find the court record. The math of what she did is in the municipal archives of the state of Georgia. That is not revenge. That is documentation. The practical fallout was swift. Dorothy and 2 other congregation members pursued formal restitution for the amounts they had given. My mother's church committee quietly asked her to step back from her leadership role pending the resolution of the legal matters. My brother's woodworking shop, which had been limping along on the diverted funds, lost its primary material supplier after the owner, a man who had also, apparently, been told the story about my condition, learned the truth. The shop closed formally 2 months after the lawsuits were filed. My brother had to go find a job for the first time in 4 years. He updated his resume to list the woodworking shop under the title of Operations and Inventory Management. He applied across the Southeast. He eventually landed a position as a regional coordinator for a medical supply distribution company based in Charlotte. On his second week of onboarding, his supervisor walked him through the company's recently implemented software system. It was a newer compliance-adjacent platform for tracking medical supply chain documentation and billing accuracy. The supervisor mentioned that the company had just completed a pilot of a product called ClearBill and had signed a full enterprise license. My brother sat at his new desk and stared at the login screen. The logo was mine, the architecture of his workday, every process he would be required to follow, every compliance report he would generate, every audit flag he would respond to was governed by the system I had built in a furnished studio in Raleigh while he was handing fraudulent documents to churchwomen on my mother's behalf. He didn't call me. He knew better by then. I found out from Priya, who had kept her professional network open even after the divorce was finalized. She texted me a single sentence, "You're never going to believe where he landed." She was wrong. I believed it completely. There's something I want to say about my grandfather, because I think he's the real beginning of this story. He wasn't a wealthy man by any standard measure. He worked at a county maintenance facility for 31 years. He drove the same pickup truck for 11 years. He kept his savings in 2 accounts and a fireproof lockbox in his closet, and he reviewed his statements every single month with a mechanical pencil and a yellow legal pad. What he gave me wasn't $84,000. He gave me the $84,000 as evidence of a principle he had tried to teach me since I was old enough to sit at his kitchen table. He used to say, "The people who want your money will always have a reason that sounds like love. It's your job to know the difference." I knew the difference. I had always known it. I just needed enough distance and enough time to build something that proved it. I'm in Austin now. ClearBill has 15 employees and is in active implementation with 31 independent practice groups across 8 states. The Series A round closed cleanly. We're 18 months from a Series B conversation if the growth trajectory holds. Priya is our legal compliance advisor. She works with us on a contract basis, which she negotiated herself with absolutely no input from me about the terms because she is that kind of person. She moved to Charlotte after the divorce. She seems lighter there. My mother sent me a text 4 months after the default judgment. She had gotten my number from a cousin. The message said she had lost everything that mattered to her. It said she didn't understand what she had done wrong. It said she hoped we could find a way back to being a family. I read it once. She did not apologize in the message. She listed her losses. She invoked the word mother the way she had always used it, as a credential, a claim, a reason to bypass the conversation we would actually need to have before anything else was possible. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Then I deleted the message and blocked the number. Not out of anger. I want to be clear about that. The anger had burned off a long time ago, somewhere in the second or third month in Raleigh, when I realized that feeding it was just another way of letting her take up space in my life. I did it because a boundary isn't a negotiating position. It isn't something you maintain when it's convenient or revisit when the other person runs out of options. A boundary is architecture. You build it because the structure requires it, and then you let it stand. There are people listening to this right now who know exactly what I mean. You've sat at a table where you were expected to give more than you had, and when you didn't, the story changed to make your refusal look like a problem with you. You've watched someone you loved turn your absence into a performance. You've done the math on what staying would have cost you. I'm not here to tell you what to do with that. I just want you to know that disappearing into your own work, building something real and quiet and protected, is a valid response. You don't owe anyone a confrontation. You don't owe anyone access to your healing. You don't owe anyone a seat at the table you built. My grandfather planted a fig tree in his backyard when I was 7 years old. He said fig trees are stubborn. They root deep. They weather droughts, and they produce more fruit the older they get. He said most people give up on them because they don't see results fast enough. I thought about that tree a lot in Raleigh. If you've made it this far and something in this story sits with you, subscribe and follow Plum Vengeance. We're here every week telling the stories that usually stay behind closed doors. I'll see you in the next one. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened in that story. Not the dramatic parts, not the moment the phones buzzed at the brunch or the day the default judgment came through, but the quiet machinery underneath all of it. The part that was always running before any of it was visible. My mother made a choice. So did my brother. They chose to take something that wasn't theirs. Not just money, not just a reputation, but the basic right I had to be seen clearly by the people who were supposed to know me. They made that choice because they believed I would absorb the cost quietly, the way I always had. They had decades of data suggesting I would. What they didn't account for was that at some point a person stops absorbing and starts building instead. I think about my grandfather a lot when I try to explain what happened. Not because he left me money is just a tool, but because of what he understood about the relationship between integrity and time. He used to say that a fig tree looks dead for its first 2 winters. You water it anyway. You don't dig it up because it isn't producing yet. That patience, that refusal to abandon something that isn't visibly yielding, that's not blind optimism. That's a specific kind of intelligence. The kind that understands compound interest isn't just a financial concept. It applies to everything you build. What my mother built was fast and leveraged and emotionally borrowed. She built it on other people's sympathy, other people's checks, other people's willingness to believe her because she had been credible for 30 years. It worked quickly, and it collapsed completely, and those two things are related. The same architecture that made it effective made it fragile. What I built was slow. It cost me sleep and social life and the ability to tell anyone what I was doing for over a year. There were months in Raleigh where the only validation I had was a line of code that finally ran without errors at 2 in the morning. That's not glamorous, but it was mine. Nobody could take it away through a forged document or a sympathetic church story because it existed in the real world in paid pilots and signed contracts and a product that solved an actual problem. I'm not saying I handled everything perfectly. There were weeks I was running on spite more than strategy. But even then, I understood the difference between spending my energy on confrontation and spending it on construction. Confrontation would have given me a moment. Construction gave me a foundation. Priya understood this too, maybe better than I did. She sat through years of Sunday dinners, pushing vegetables around her plate, watching a toxic system perform itself, and she never blew the perimeter before I was ready. That took discipline. That took a kind of moral clarity that doesn't get celebrated enough, the willingness to do the right thing on someone else's timeline because the situation requires it. And Dorothy, a woman I had never met, stood up at a church brunch and walked out quietly to call her bank. That small act of refusing to be complicit any further, that matters. The world asks us constantly to go along, to be polite, to not make things awkward. Dorothy made it slightly awkward, and it was the right thing to do. Here's what I believe about cause and effect, stripped of any framework beyond the observable. What you repeatedly choose eventually becomes what you are. My mother chose deception so consistently that it became her primary tool for every situation. My brother chose to let other people carry the cost of his failures so consistently that he genuinely lost the ability to carry anything himself. I chose to build, even when building in secret felt lonely and strange and like it might never amount to anything. The outcomes weren't punishment or reward in any cosmic sense. They were just the logical conclusions of sustained choices. That's the part that took me the longest to fully accept, that I didn't need someone to adjudicate the situation. I just needed to keep going long enough for the math to complete itself.